This video will be going through the cell membrane transport notes. If you haven't already, go to the Chapter 8 drawer and get the cell transport notes so that you can complete these. So you know the cell membrane was one of our organelles that we've talked about. And the cell membrane is on all cells. So it's in the prokaryotes, down in the bacteria, it's up in the eukaryotes like us, like animals, like plants. So the cell membrane is for everybody. So this is something that every cell in the world has to deal with, is how we transport things through the membrane. Remember, we're going to focus on the membrane here. The cell membrane was the outside of the cell, and its job was to keep everything inside the cell. Now, that's not its only job, though, so we kind of simplified that definition when we did organelles the other day. But the cell membrane can help us in other ways too. It's not just being the outside of the cell and keeping things inside. That would be like me saying your skin is just for that purpose. When it's not, your skin has a lot of purposes, and only one of them is to be the outside of your body and to keep all of your organs on the inside. The cell membrane does other things. One of the most important things that it does is that it controls the passage of materials into and out of the cell. So this means some stuff can go through the membrane, and the cell membrane kind of controls what can and can't enter and exit. That's really good because we don't want things just falling into our cells or flying out of them. We need it to be controlled. Now I want you to think about this question. Why would we want some things to go through the membrane? I like to think of our cells as tiny organisms because they are. What do you need? It's probably about the same thing that your cells need. So why would we want some things to go in there? What would we want to go in there? Well, mainly the same things we need. The cell may need food or water, and it may want to remove waste. Think about what you need. You're actually eating and drinking and removing waste because that's what your cells are doing. When you're hungry, it's that all your cells are hungry. So when you eat, you're actually feeding each individual cell in your body so that they can make energy in their mitochondria. You got to give them water so they can stay hydrated too. So what you need, your cells need. So when you're thirsty, your cells are actually thirsty. So they need to take in food and water, and then they need to remove waste out of their cells. So we're going to see how they do this. But first, we kind of need to know a little bit of the membrane itself, some of the parts and the structures. So the first part of the cell membrane is a phospholipid. Now we should know part of that word, maybe all of that word. Think about it. What's phospho mean? What does lipid mean? So a phospholipid has phosphorus and it has fat involved because remember lipids are fats. So a phospholipid has three parts, a phosphate group, a glycerol, and two fatty acid chains. So these are just a bunch of pieces and parts that make a phospholipid, but a phospholipid is what your cell membranes are made of. Now, if you think way back to when we talked about lipids, we talked about that one of their jobs was to help make the cell membrane. Well, it's right here in these phospholipids where the lipids help us. Now, on your notes, it asks you to draw and label one phospholipid. So here is a phospholipid for you. I want you to draw and label exactly like this picture. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just try your best. I would suggest you pause while you do that. If you're having trouble reading them, this is the head. This is the tail. This is phosphorus head and fatty acid chain. So the head of the phospholipid is where the phosphorus is. The tail is where the fatty acid chains are, and the glycerols help combine the two so we don't label them. So go ahead and make sure that you have that drawn. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on phospholipids. So phospholipids. The head of the phospholipid is the phosphate group and that glycerol, that's where it's attached there. And it is hydrophilic. We're going way back to chapter 2 here. What does hydrophilic mean? Let's start with that beginning again. What's hydro mean? Hydro means water. And then what did philic mean? Remember the opposite is down there at the bottom, hydrophobic. So what does hydrophilic mean? It means that it loves water. Remember, it's water loving, or it's fine being around water. So the head of the phospholipid is fine being near water. And it says here the tail of the phospholipid is those two fatty acid chains. And what does hydrophobic mean? Because it's hydrophobic. Well, that means that it hates water or that it's scared of water. So the tails of your fatty acid chains there, the phospholipid tails, don't like water. This is really important because we just said that water goes through the membrane. So how am I going to get it all the way through if part of the membrane, the head, likes the water, but the tails hate the water? I can't just set it up normally. I can't just sit them there because they're going to have trouble with that water. Remember, hydrophobic, they push the water back out. So what happens is that the cell membrane forms a bilayer. And what does bi mean? That prefix, it means two. So it's going to form a layer out of two phospholipids that are grouped together. This is going to help protect the hydrophilic and the hydrophobic parts. Let me show you what I mean. So you can see here we have a bilayer. I would draw exactly this and label it. Now see those faded ones back there? You don't have to draw the faded ones. I would just draw this forward row. But this is a bilayer. Extracellular just means outside of the cell, and intracellular just means inside the cell. So this is just it saying here's the inside, or here's the inside, and here's the outside. And we've got our hydrophilic heads and our hydrophobic tails, and this whole thing is called a phospholipid bilayer. So this is what your cell membrane looks like when you get really, really close. So if you look, whoa, my bad. So if you look, our hydrophilic heads are on the outsides and the insides, and our tails are in the middle. This is good because on the outside of our cells, sometimes we come in contact with water, right? Think about your skin. It comes in contact with water. And the inside of our cells are in almost constant contact with water because if you remember, the cytoplasm is mostly water. So the cytoplasm is going to be water. The outside of your cells come in contact with water. So both of those sides needed the hydrophilic parts on their side. Now the hydrophobic tails are in the middle, almost protected from the water. So they don't have to interact with water nearly as much because they're stuck in the middle. This is the best arrangement for your cells. If they were just one layer, like if they was just this top layer, then these tails would all touch water, and they hate that, and that would make your cell membranes fall apart, which is very dangerous. We don't need our cell membranes fall apart, then our cells fall apart. Make sure you have this picture down and labeled. Don't forget labeling. It's really important. There will be pictures of your cell membranes later on. So let's go over what we just said. Why are all those heads pointing to the outside? Well, it's because they're hydrophilic. So they want to be near the water on the outside of the cell and near the water in the cytoplasm. So they want to be on both sides, inside the cell and outside the cell. And the opposite, why are all the tails grouped in the middle? Well, it's because they're hydrophobic. So they want to be away from the water on the outside and away from the water on the cytoplasm. So that leaves them with being grouped in the middle. Now that's not all that the cell membrane is. There's a little bit more to it. There's 3 more parts that help do everything our cells need to do. The first part is cholesterol. Now cholesterol is a lipid, and sometimes we hear it talked about as a bad thing. You might have heard old people usually have high cholesterol or have to worry about their cholesterol. Well, cholesterol is good for you to a point. We need it to help make our membranes. We just don't need a lot of it. Now, cholesterol is used to strengthen our membrane, and what that means is it allows our membrane to move without breaking. So it kind of sits in our membrane. You'll see a picture here in a minute. It sits inside our membrane and allows our membrane to become more flexible. Being flexible is really important for our membrane. We don't want our membrane to be inflexible, or else it wouldn't be able to move. This flexibility is actually called the fluid mosaic model. And I want you to write that over to the side of your notes. Fluid mosaic model. And if you don't know how to spell mosaic, it's M-O-S-A-I-C. So the fluid mosaic model. This is what we call our models of cell membranes because they can be flexible. So when they're flexible, but not just breaking, we say that they're fluid, right? To be fluid means you can be flexible. Mosaic is a type of art where you put a bunch of little pieces together. Well, that's kind of what's happening here at the cell membrane, right? We put all those phospholipids together. Now we're putting cholesterol. We're going to put 2 more pieces. So our membranes are a mosaic. They're a bunch of different things put together, and it's flexible. So I want you to make sure that you've written on the side of your notes, fluid mosaic model. Okay, our next object in the cell membrane are proteins. Some proteins go all the way through the bilayer, and they help materials go from one side to the other. This is officially cell membrane transport. So some things can just diffuse across the membrane, and we'll talk about the word diffusion here really soon, but they can just flow from the outside to the inside. And some things need proteins to help them move. When it needs a protein, then it's getting help. This is facilitated. It's being helped across. That's fine. The protein is just acting almost like a noodle. It's just a tube, and things can just flow in and out. And our last object is our carbohydrate chain. This is attached to the outside of the cell and is used for communication. I call it a name tag. So think about it. If you're wearing a name tag, like the teachers in the building, we're all supposed to be wearing our name tags. Well, that's not really for you. You know who I am. But that's for other people when they come into the building, so they know who we are. It's a name tag. Our cells need this chain on the outside so the other cells know who they are. This is really important because our cells don't like foreign cells. Think about it. Every time a cell sees a cell it doesn't know, it thinks it might be bacteria, something to get you sick. So our cells need little name tags so they know who is who. Now the next thing on your notes says you're going to draw the phospholipid bilayer. This picture is going to look very overwhelming at first. If you're an artist, you'll draw it all. I am not, so I will show you how I would draw it. See this? Very overwhelming. If I were drawing this, I would draw just this first front layer. I cannot draw in 3D like this, so I would draw just this front. Now I would add a carbohydrate chain sticking out because it needs to be there, but I would draw just this front with a bunch of phospholipids. These little greenish blue guys are cholesterols. Make sure to label those. The purple is the protein, and then this green sticking out is our carbohydrate chain. It's a name tag. And you can see here that they took the red of this cell membrane and blew it up. So if we kept growing this and growing this, it would eventually form the whole circle of the cell. Take a second and draw this. If you're having trouble, you can go into the book and look at a picture as well. That might help you. But you want to make sure that you have a picture of this as well, with the cholesterols, with the protein, and with a carb chain. At least one of each. You'll want more phospholipids because they make up all the extra stuff, but at least one cholesterol, protein, and carb chain. When you're done, move on. We're almost finished with the notes. So a cell membrane is said to be selectively permeable. What do you think that means? So first, to be selective, or having something to be selective, it means that it's going to be able to control what's going in and out of the membrane. It's choosing, right? To be selective is to be choosy. So our membrane is selective. It chooses what goes in and out. Now remember, not with its brain. Cells aren't that smart. It's choosing based on chemicals. So it's just letting whatever chemicals can flow in, they're letting them go in. And whatever chemicals can't are staying out. What does the word permeable mean, though? This one's a little bit more difficult. So permeable, to permeate, means to let things sink in. So we use the word permeable in our world most often when we're talking about like water on dirt. The water permeates through the dirt, so it sinks into the dirt. So for permeable here, it means that the cell is going to have holes and spots that let material go through the membrane. It's going to permeate through the membrane. So when you put it together, selectively permeable just means that the cell membrane can choose what goes in and what goes out of it. So our cell membrane has that choice. It can choose what's going in and what's coming out. Now we have one more small part, which are chemical signals. These are a little bit difficult, so we're just going to try and get the basics. So cells can't talk. I don't know if you knew that already, but cells can't talk. So cells need to be able to talk in a way that's not with words. They use receptors. I like to think of it like a radio. They're sending a message out, little radio waves, and then a receptor picks it up. And then the cell can answer. So there are two types of receptors that our cells are going to use, two types of signals that our cells will use and then try to collect. The first one is an intracellular receptor. So this is when the signal can go all the way into the membrane and be inside the cell. This is like the radio in your car, right? The radio waves go all the way inside your car to get to the radio. So they're intracellular or intra-car. So they can go from the airwaves inside your car so that you can hear them. Same thing with a cell here. This is a message that can go inside the cell so that it can hear it on the inside. An extracellular receptor sits on the outside of the cell membrane, and it talks to signals that cannot go through the membrane. So that's something like, say there was a person standing outside the window right now and just yelling. We may not be able to hear him because his sound would be extracellular. It would be stuck outside the building. We might be able to hear it just a little, but not very well. So he would be stuck on the outside. So I could only hear him if I went outside to hear him. That's really the only difference. So these are both things that the cells use to listen and to do everything they need to do. For us, that would be something like, you know how your stomach growls when you're hungry? Well, that's your cells responding to a signal. A signal was sent to their receptor saying, hey, we're hungry. And so your stomach growls because of that signal. You should have all of your notes filled in now. I would go back and read through this and make sure you understand it before you move on. The next assignment is going to be practicing with all of these parts of the cell membrane.